in ways that protect and uplifts movements and communities. So I hope in today's conversations, we'll be having a fruitful conversations about how PGM can expand more effectively through crises. We're going to be talking about identifying practical strategies for implementing PGMs in different contexts. We will also hope to discuss challenges that may arise and brainstorm solutions and highlight complementary approaches that can enhance PGM's overall crisis response measures. So let's dive in and co-create the space over the next 90 minutes or so for learning and collaborations. Alongside some remarkable leaders from the Rawe Fund, from the Dalan Fund, and Purposeful, as we explore navigating PGM during turbulent times. This is not just about responding to crisis. It's about reimagining power, participation, and community in philanthropy. So thank you for being here. So as I mentioned, the next 90 minutes will be principally in 3 parts. First, we're going to have introductions, and we'll dive right into the plenary with question and answers from our panelists, and they'll introduce their organization and the work that they do with PGM during polycrises. And then we're going to pivot a bit and have 3 simultaneous cafe sessions, as we're calling it, which are opportunities for us to go into breakout rooms and have a more intimate, deeper conversations about specific aspects of the work that our panelists are advancing. And then finally, after the breakouts, we're going to reconvene in the plenary to share our insights from the breakout sessions, and then also to have a Q&A round before closing. Before we begin, there's some housekeeping notes I'd like to share. The session will be 90 minutes. The session is being recorded. There is a little button that's probably in front of you right now. Press OK, please. The recording will be available shortly after the call on the PGM community YouTube for those of us who weren't able to attend the session live, or for those of us who want to revisit this conversation at a later date. Please go ahead and introduce yourself on the chat. Please indicate your name, your preferred pronouns, your organizational affiliation, where you're based. And you may have already received a message through email, but unfortunately, because of a technical issue with our Zoom, we're unable to track all the language translation requests at this time. So this conversation will be principally in English, and we'll provide live captioning for accessibility. And of course, we regret this inconvenience, and we are really working hard within the PGM community to hope to improve our accessibility options for future events. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce our speakers. We are honored to have Nino, Yara, and Ruby with us today. Each of the panelists are seasoned PGM practitioners that are addressing crisis and emergency situations within their community. Nino is from the Dalan Fund, and she is a feminist resource justice advocate from Tbilisi, Georgia. She is the lead of the Dalan Fund, an activist-led fund that resources Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central and North Asia. Yara is from Jerusalem and is a farmer and food sovereignty activist. She has been a part of Sahban farm team since 2018 and joined Rawa's team in 2022 as part of the Grants and Support Program, which lies in her interest of cooperative forming and initiatives as a way to build resilience for the community. And Ruby Johnson from Purposeful, the Global Resilience Fund, is a feminist activist, practitioner, writer, and strategist, fiercely committed to redistributing resources and power to intersectional social justice movements, in particular working out alongside girls and young feminists. Okay, so to our panelists, I would like to pose a question for each of you. I believe that Yara will start. Each of the panelists will have about 6 to 7 minutes to introduce themselves and to respond to this question. So, panelists, Each of you works with unique and challenging contexts, addressing a range of overlapping and compounding crises, both long-term and emergency situations. In light of this, can you each share what participatory grant-making looks like for your organization? How has your organization adapted or evolved its participatory grant-making approach to meet the demands of these polycrises? Specifically, what challenges and opportunities have you encountered while implementing PGM in your contexts? Yara, I hand over the mic to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. I might have some technical issues with the internet, I'm not sure, but if I turn off the camera, that's to have a better quality. So my name is Yara. I work with Rawa for the last 2.5 years. Rawa is a participatory model. It began as a pilot in 2018. I think the main purpose of Rawa is to give power to the initiatives working on the ground, to have a model that is flexible for the initiatives. Also, the way we select initiatives is through cluster members all across Palestine, that they nominate initiatives that they know or heard about, and then the community themselves, the community of Rawa, vote for the initiatives. We give unconditional funding with having less burden on the reporting and the financial part of funding. And we believe that we should trust the community in knowing what's best for them, not us coming and telling them what's best for them, even though we're from Palestine. So we had 3 cycles of grants, each cycle for 22, 24 initiatives. And this year was supposed to be a year for reflection and learning and closing the last cycle. Of course, the plan didn't go ahead due to the genocide that is happening. So we had to adapt quickly and be flexible also. So our plan changed, and it's good that it changed. But I think what's interesting is that how can we, as Palestinians working in Palestine, in the middle of all what's happening, also have the energy to think and give back to the community? And I think that was the most challenging part. The first few months, we were really stuck, helpless, feeling really small. We have a lot of partners and initiatives in Gaza, and it was really difficult to reach out and to communicate. So it was difficult to think ahead of how to move together, what's going to happen now, how to collect ourselves and try to reach out to the grassroots movement and see what they need and how we can support them. And also our initiatives in the West Bank, in the last few months, we had to go call them, check up on them, and ask them to deliver the reports. And we had to extend for a year, which usually doesn't happen. But this is just, I'm giving a few examples on how we had to quickly adapt to the situation and also rethink our priorities, try to develop our strategy and vision, but at the same time react quickly. This was something really difficult to do at the same time, to have this year as a way to look forward and think about the next step for Rawa after finishing the 3 cycles and the pilot period. But at the same time, you have an emergency that needs you to react quickly. And you cannot also take so much time into like the participatory model becomes a bit tricky, because usually with the participatory, how we do it, we talk to the community, we visit, we have time to reflect and take decision. But with the crisis, you don't have time to reflect, because the priorities keep changing, the needs keep changing, and the resources that are available keep changing. So we had to change a lot of methods that we were using to be there for our community. I will talk more about this and give more examples in the breakout room. But yeah, this is what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Yara. I want to hand over the mic to Dalan. to also answer the same question.
Thank you so much,
To
Coco.
Nino, sorry,
can
from
you
the
hear
Dalan
me?
Fund.
Yeah.
Yes.
I actually, first of all, want to thank Yara for being on the call, because given the current situation and how everything is unfolding in Palestine and Lebanon, I really, really appreciate the time and space that we are holding together. And I think this conversation is exceptionally timely and important given everything that is happening in the world, and polycrisis, unfortunately, has never been more real. And a lot of what Yara said in terms of politics and how Rawa works is very true for Dalan as well. We also are an activist-led fund. And we primarily started building this fund actually in January 2023, so we are very new. But we started building the fund really acknowledging the polycrisis that is happening in the regions that are one of the least funded parts of the world. We always say we want to situate the crisis that we are working in, and first crisis response we had to do was in Georgia, which happens to be my own country. So it was very painful that the point of why Dalan should exist was proven in my own country, but here we are. We are an activist-led fund, which means that everyone who is part of the team and the community are people who have the closest proximity to all different crises that are happening in the Cessna regions. Ega, my colleague, perhaps can put in the chat what Cessna stands for, but it's Central Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central and North Asia. So we work in 16 countries, and we were very committed to designing the processes together with people for whom and with whom we want to work. So not only do we make decisions together with the community of advisors, but the entire programming and strategies at Dalan are built together with the people we are working with as well. So when we were not planning to make grants for crisis response in Georgia in starting May, because we were intending to take our sweet time, do it diligently, do it carefully and cautiously. And we did a lot of prep work to get to the point of operationalizing our grant making. And we were planning originally to start it in October, but then the crisis hit and we were somewhat ready. So we built the blueprint of our crisis response while actually being in the midst of the very storm itself. And so we have built the advisory specifically for Georgia crisis response, which also is very important to be named as a regional crisis, because whatever is happening in this particular country is impacting entire regions. So we were very intentional at building layers of country-specific crisis response, but also addressing the regional dimensions as well. And so we have the advisory that comes together to build the entire process together. And it's very, very important to acknowledge that in the realms of flexibility, the crisis, even though it started only in May, has longer history and it's changing very fast. So the flexibility of this community coming together and reassessing and perhaps sometimes changing the direction slightly to be in tune of what's happening in this particular context is very important. I really need to name as one of the big challenges the possibilities, limited possibilities of moving money within what happens to be rising authoritarianism. Unfortunately, this is very true for many countries across the regions we are working in. And challenge and the opportunity there definitely is alternative funding infrastructure and mechanisms how the money can move. We know that there are parts of the world that are difficult to move money to, but thanks to some alternative infrastructure such as fiscal host and our own fiscal host that was phenomenal and the massive feminist ally in moving the money, we were actually able to move money within 2 weeks' time. We always say we are not rapid response grant maker, but we happened to turn into one. And now I guess that's the pace we have to stick with and work with. But ultimately, how money moves and mechanisms through which this happens are very, very important. And that's probably a conversation for entire day, not just a couple of hours. And perhaps we can tap into it a little bit in the breakout room. But I would say that that infrastructure of how money moves, but infrastructure of trust between people who are coming together to make this co-design and decision are life-saving, because we were able to approve all the applications that we were receiving within 24 hours time, because our advisory was very committed to really making the decisions as fast as we possibly could, knowing that the window of opportunity of moving money within the country was very rapidly closing. And also, I think there is a massive value, and that's the last thing I'm going to say as an opening. Sorry if I'm taking too much time, but it is very, very important to understand that intermediary funds are very well positioned, and that proximity we have to what happens in this crisis are very crucial. And in that realms, we also understand that sometimes we cannot move big money, big amount of grants in crisis like Georgia, because governments are blocking bank accounts, and there's so much that is happening from the point of processing the grant to this money hitting bank accounts of activists and groups. So sometimes moving smaller money makes bigger impact, and it's safer for activists on the ground. So that needs very specific infrastructure, and I think intermediary funds are very well positioned to serve that purpose. And also, I have to very explicitly name that we are an ecosystem of funders, right? Not everyone needs to be making emergency grants. Not everyone needs to be participatory grant maker either. There are many mechanisms existing out there that can serve and come together to play different parts at different types of crisis and at the different stages of crisis, because we are talking about crisis response right now, but what we really also need to look at is preparedness. And I really believe that mainstreaming preparedness for this crisis that are emerging and upcoming is very, very important, as much as recovery, because we know that activists are at the forefront of recovery efforts as much as prevention efforts as well. So Dalan is really looking at the 4 dimensions of prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery, so that we are putting activists and movements really at the centerpiece of how all of it is resolved. And that definitely guarantees that responses are most effective and really in tune with what is most strategic and timely at that point in time. I'm going to pause it here. We have opportunity to dig deep into many aspects of hows and whys and political reasoning and positioning. So I'm going to pass the mic back to you, Coco, and I'm really looking forward to a breakout from conversation as well. And again, thank you so much for holding this space, because this could not be more timely.
Thank you for that introduction, Nino. Let me pass the mic on to Ruby.
Thanks so much, Coco, and thank you, Nino, and thank you, Yara. And I echo what you said, Nino, about being here, Yara, and also you, Nino, because the situation in Georgia, it's also it's good that you're here. So I'm going to just share a little bit first about the Global Resilience Fund, and then sort of share a bit about the model and the way we're working. So it's a collaborative feminist fund that's moving flexible resources to girls and young feminists in a range of different types of crises. So humanitarian, political, social, ecological, climate, and many more, usually layered and intersecting crises. The fund emerged out of the COVID-19 pandemic and sparked and sustained by purposeful, and from the beginning it was really collaborative. So, and Women Win, who I see is also here in the room, were really key, along with around 20 other funders, so women and feminist funds, private funders, multilateral agencies, and a range of around 30 activists were part of the founding kind of advisory. And since that sort of moment of emergence during the pandemic, we've continued to fund in a real range of crises. So floods in Pakistan and Libya, earthquakes in Turkey, Syria, Morocco, Haiti, funding organizing on the streets of Kenya really recently, DRC, and ongoing genocides in Palestine and in Sudan. And the way that we do PGM and the kind of model and approach looks really different in different contexts. So it's like very different locally, kind of grounded, and I can share a bit more what that looks like. But since we started, we've worked with this advisory, and it's kind of global, but then regionally grounded. And the advisory have really been part of right through from like outreach, identifying groups, to accompaniment, driving the strategies, connecting to groups, reviewing applications, making resource decisions. And that's usually done through consensus. usually over calls, but if that's not possible and if we have really limited resource, sometimes through signal chats, sometimes very quick turnaround, sometimes it takes much longer depending on the need and what is safe. And we've tried to really adapt our application process in lots of languages. So we've had Ukrainian, Burmese, Arabic, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Swahili, and others. And just whenever we can, we work with activists locally to translate, and really trying to, I guess, reduce the burden for activists and not waste people's time. So we've tried to, as much as we can, only reach out to groups and sort of identified lists and sort of ask them to do any labor when we're pretty sure we can fund them. So we have a kind of almost like a tailored approach, and we sort of activate and pop up in different contexts, working with our advisors. And maybe to say that I think it's highly adaptive. So I mentioned it's kind of has looked really different in different contexts. And part of that is because ultimately, like, the advisors that we're working with are also, and the team are also living through those exact same crises. So, and what we found a lot of the time is that they need to flee, they're in exile, they need to move their community and their whole family, or in sort of deep response. So the reality is that sometimes they're not in a place to be part of a, reviewing applications, and it's just not realistic. And so that's, we've needed to be really flexible. But I think it's also been really amazing that often activists in the diaspora, or that there's this sort of regional solidarity and approach that is really critical, and that people, even in the most like dire situations, like actually really want to be part of resource distribution conversations, want to be part of kind of having that kind of discussion of mutual aid and what does collective kind of resource allocation look like. And that is in many ways like part of people's kind of like a solidarity, a political act of solidarity. So, and I think particularly in the diaspora, like we've seen a lot of activists who really want to keep being part of those processes, but it's so much more than money. So it's also, the stories, documenting, working with them to amplify demands, and finding ways to really use the access we have to different funders. Yeah, I think like a learning, I guess, is just like the need to keep challenging ourselves that we're not depoliticizing a process around PGM, and that it's not sort of a series of steps, but it's actually like an evolving practice, and about the relationships that we're building with movement and with communities, and that they're driving the decisions, and that sometimes it might not make sense to do it in one way, and just to like continue to challenge. And we don't always get it right. And yeah, I guess just being willing to say, actually, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to do participatory. Let's just get the money, and just being really honest with ourselves. Yeah. And I think a couple of the challenges, and then I'll wrap, but I think the challenge and the uncomfortable truth, I think particularly because we're funding across different contexts, is that there's often crises that are like obscured or defunded, unfunded, not prioritized by funders. And that's like creates inequity, and really like it's really hard when you have restricted funding for certain crises and not for others. And so that's challenging. And we've tried to have like a 20% kind of overhead that we then reallocate to different crises, and that's worked really well. But not all funders will accept that, so it's a negotiation. The final point, just before I wrap, I think just to want to lift up that the fund really is also like a collaborative fund. So, and I like that you mentioned the ecosystem, Nino, and I think we've really tried, because there's so many funds that have been part of collaborating, it's more like a kind of a symbiosis, reciprocity. We really try to look at, okay, who is funding already? What can we complement? How can we not kind of compete? What are the gaps, and how can we work together? And so part of that has also been sort of looking where we can step back, step forward, looking, how we can work with others, and where we can share due diligence processes, and just like create a sort of more of a community between funders and organize ourselves. And one example just to share, we've had some really great work with Madre, where when Madre is funding in a particular context, like Afghanistan, we don't fund ourselves, but we move money to Madre to fund directly. And then in the same for us, when we funded in Libya and in Turkey, they move money to us, and sort of recognizing, okay, who's best placed, and how can we just be really honest about the different roles that we're playing in the ecosystem, and where we can strengthen and support and share risk. And I guess ultimately like how we can get the money where it needs to go, and really reduce the burden for activists as well. So I'll stop there. If I didn't speak too fast. Over to you, Coco. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. And thank you, Nino and Yara, for these incredible introductions. It's just, as I know, skimming the surface of some of the most incredibly powerful, yet obviously incredibly challenging and critically needed work that you all are doing. And there were so many issues that were brought up. So I'm really happy that we're moving right along now, and we're gonna dive into what we're calling our cafe sessions. So we have 30 minutes up until the top of the hour now to dive into different breakout rooms. There's going to be 3 different breakout rooms, each with a facilitated conversation by one of our panelists. We're hoping that we can, every room will have a note taker assigned, and that note taker will be able to present back during the plenary some key points from the discussions that were had in the breakout session. And so yeah, each group will have about 3 minutes or so to do that. There's going to be a link, I believe, shared for a Padlet for note taking. And participants are allowed to move between the different groups since they'll be having very different conversations. And so feel free to move between that. You'll see possibly already on your screen the breakout groups. In room number 1, and we'll post this here so that on the chat so that you will all know where to go. It will be hosted by Nino and the Dalan Fund, and the participants in this room will be discussing the challenges of PGM and adaptations people are making in crisis context. The conversation will cover how PGM works, why it is a political statement, and issues related to risk and compliance issues, and managing the constant and evolving needs during crises while focusing on sustainability and recovery. So that's room 1, hosted by Nino, the Dalan Fund. In room 2, which will be facilitated by Yara from Rawe Fund, we'll explore the complementary alternatives to PGM, examining sustainable community support and innovative models of community giving that can coexist along with PGM. In this breakout room, there will also be a conversation about how Rawa is different from other funders funding the Palestinian grassroots initiatives as they respond to the genocide and escalation of violence in Gaza and the West Bank. They will also be discussing how they are taking care of people on the ground who are risking their lives every single day. And the third breakout room, which is going to be facilitated by Ruby from Purposeful, the Global Resilience Fund, the discussion will center on the future of PGM amid polycrisis. And participants will consider how grantmaking can become more resourced and localized, hopefully drawing on technology and ways that we can decentralize power. There'll also be a discussion about what meaningful participation and accountability looks like during crisis, and how to deal with the constant changes and movement of people in times of crisis. So without further ado, we will post the summaries in the chat so folks can refer back to them. We're opening up the breakout room, and then we will collect back here in a little, like 3 minutes over the hour, the top of the hour. So please move to the great breakout rooms. And if you have any questions, please send either me or Gloria a chat.
Yeah, I hope folks can find them really helpful and useful. Oh, I'm gonna
participatory response. We talked a bit about the idea of a definition and why that can be important, why that might be needed or not needed, and what is problematic around it. They share a bit around, Nino shared briefly around Dalan's experience and how when crisis happens, the priority should be the rapid part of the rapid response, and we should be able to have the infrastructure, as she called it, as well as have the resources in place to be able to respond to the crisis as needed and when it's needed. We also talked a bit about idea around how we how there can be a different understanding of crisis and how that can affect the how can the handling of the crisis can be affected by that, and how the participatory part of it can be impacted by it. Different understanding of crisis can hinder different groups to be able to assist and provide and to support the groups on the ground. We also mentioned a bit about how participatory grant making should be the goal in many sense, and how it is important to have the spaces and have the resources, even if it can be resource heavy at times, to give the space and to give the voice to groups and individuals from the ground to participate and bring in their needs in the participatory part of the processes. And I think that about sums it up, but Nino, maybe you can jump in if there is something that you would like to add.
No, thank you so much, Gonza. I think the biggest takeaway is just not having one definition of crisis, but really making sure that activists and movements offer their own understandings and definitions. Therefore, that definition would determine how the crisis response is built and how the participatory component of it is built into the entire process. And we spoke so much about the silos within which we have to operate in philanthropy and how that is felt on the organizing front, because organizing is not as siloed as the funding world is, and that shows. But yes, and there are notes that we will synthesize and share with the participants so we can, and thank you, Gonza, for note-taking and presenting.
Thank you for that. The representative from room number 2. Hand over the mic.
Anyone would like to present, or shall I go ahead? Okay. So my room was lovely. We had just we were chatting first about how to support our members or the community in difficult times and crisis, and I was sharing how it was difficult for me to contact partners or initiatives in Gaza at the beginning, because I felt there is nothing I can say, or I felt maybe I'm not ready to I don't have the capacity to receive what I will be hearing, or maybe I'll feel guilty about the privilege that I have living in Jerusalem and Ramallah. But what I was saying, that just by calling or texting, I realized that people want to share. Most of the time they want to share, and you don't really have to think a lot about what to ask them. You just try to say, how are you? And they share. And I always simply ask, if there's anything we can support with, please let me know. And then after some months of connecting with them, you realize that people actually think of you when they need support, and they ask you and they reach out specifically because you are in touch with them. And the last point was that they don't also want to feel isolated. We talked also about how we can come together or organize ourselves in different places, different organizations. I said that it's a difficult topic. I'm always being asked how we can help or what we can support, and I always have difficulty in knowing what to say. But I guess to try to make an effect or change in your small circles, to talk about what's really important, which is stopping the genocide or whatever other crisis that is happening. We also talked about how we evaluate the grants and how we make sure that the money is being spent on what it's supposed to be spent on. And I shared that at this point it's really difficult because everything has to be quick, and we're in an emergency state for a while. So you have to, what we do is we try to talk with the community around us and to see if they know the initiative, if they heard about them, if they have anything to share. And most of the time that's enough. And what we did also to minimize the risk is that we don't move big amount of money. As I mentioned before, we move small amounts of money because we're not sure if the money will be received and if the priorities will change, if the resources they thought doesn't exist anymore. So we just do the support without too much investigation and without also requirement for them to, they don't have to write anything or apply. Sometimes it's just a phone call or a voice message or a text. And I guess you have to trust that whatever money is sent to Gaza with the situation will all be going to basics, water and hygiene products and food and clothes and shoes. So you just have to be responsive and trust the other the story you hear, and trust the people who are contacting you or you heard about them. And just with quick calls, you might get really good feedback from the community. Also, sorry if I'm taking a long time, but yeah, there was a question about other ways to move money and how the ways of getting money also. And we had a small chat about that. And that's it, I think. Maybe someone can add if I missed anything. I didn't miss anything.
Thank you so much, Yara. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
the representative from room number 3. Can you please share back?
Hello. I'm not sure that I will be able to do justice to the great conversation we had in our room, but it was very nice to hear from a range of people and organizations, and particularly just acknowledging that people were at different stages on their kind of PGM journey. So we had a key reflection around the term polycrisis, and thinking about whether that actually hides the impacts of capitalism. And we talked a bit about, could we support, how can we support PGM while also trying to address the root causes and acknowledge the funding sources that actually some of the grant making comes from. We had a nice few questions that were posed in the chat, including what local and localized support looks like in different contexts. There was a reflection from a US perspective on how some people can see humanitarian crises as international, but that we also need to acknowledge how international crises then impact directly on our local communities. We talked about the importance of effective community working, which comes from a place of love and respect. In terms of decentralizing power, again, some good questions about how we do due diligence and ensure that we're not serving personal interest or paying lip service as funders. So some suggestions around that were supporting communities and emphasizing that power should be pushed back to them to identify solutions and support for them to access funding. We also talked about in terms of like reporting, etc., and evaluation, that actually holding space for calls and human contact, not just report writing, is an effective way to actually feel connected. And just the importance of making sure that participatory grant making doesn't become depoliticized in terms of like who holds power and why are people choosing to use this work. And then the final kind of chunk was just about acknowledging the challenge of living in crisis while also supporting people around you to respond through participatory grant making, and the importance of taking time to reflect with the team. Those moments for learning, reflection, and kind of taking work forwards can be really challenging to find during times of crisis, but we just acknowledge generally that there was lots of potential for positive future work, and that it's really important, and that there will always be groups on the front line of response who will be able to use that funding well. And yeah, just the importance of continuing to come together in spaces like this to share and support.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all who provided summaries. Just again, a taste of the richness of the conversations. Of course, we could go on for hours and delve deeper into this, but I'm very cognizant that we actually only have 9 more minutes. Maybe enough time for 1 or 2 folks to ask a question. I invite anyone who wants to put their hand up or post a question on the chat. We will not get to everyone's questions, I know, but hopefully we can get 1 or 2. Does anyone have a question? I'm going to scan through. If you do, unmute yourself. No questions. I might be missing someone, so if there isn't, are there any questions? Yes, no?
I haven't seen any in the chats. Maybe folks are still digesting.
Okay. Well, I always have a question as the moderator. So maybe we can just give the panelists 1 minute to sort of do a closing to tell us about their recommendations about rebuilding resilience within their communities. You know, how have any of the practices that you have developed over the last period of time strengthened community capacity to not just survive, but to thrive? So I'll put this back to the panelists for whoever wants to take that question.
Perhaps I can quickly share. My observation is that calling in the participatory advisory, who is directly most impacted by the crisis itself, and then having spaces for grantee partners to connect dots and almost hold space for collective therapy was helpful. It's really helpful for the sense of agency and understanding that there is something we can do while everything is falling apart. So that has been very true for the staff and advisory and our grantee partners as well. And there's a very deep care and community spirit that is built around this. And I think the biggest value we've seen so far is not only the amazing work that activists are able to do, but the impact of people connecting through the grant making process itself. And I think that is one of the most beautiful pieces that emerge, even though there's a lot of pain and a lot of rage and anger that is motivating and moving, unfortunately, the work that we are doing in that specific context. And also something I wanted to lift up, and I completely forgot to mention, is that I was briefly speaking about the infrastructure and the role of fiscal hosts and our fiscal host, which Ruby mentioned Women Win, and they are the stellar fiscal hosts that are hosting us as well. They are also hosting other funders that were able to give money because we went through the due diligence, and our due diligence was a reference for 2 other funders to move money to the same groups that were fitting their portfolios as well. So there is a feminist ecosystem of fiscal hosting and shared understanding of political trust amongst funders. That was also very important to see how that solidarity was manifested in other funders stepping in and moving money there as well. And some of the referrals that were set up in addition to the direct grant making. There's also a lot that needs to be said about what happens beyond money. And I'm sure there will be space to discuss that, but yes.
Thank you, Nino. Yara or Ruby, you have both a minute if you'd like to have a closing statement.
Yeah, maybe I can just share that in the middle of crisis, don't forget your team. We tend to focus too much on the outside and supporting the community and the initiatives. Sometimes you forget to take care of the team who are also in the middle of the crisis. That's what I want to share.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Yara.
Yeah, just everything resonates, what everyone has shared. I think I would just also add just like trusting people and like seeing, like acknowledging that you're remembering their, like, and checking in on people, and like just like the very simple acts of always just like being in touch is really important. And I think also like supporting where there's interest to do so, supporting grantees, advisors to do, and I said this in the breakout group, like documentation, storytelling, like to kind of archive and to find some space and time to kind of preserve some of what they're experiencing and to tell their own stories and narratives, and that can build sort of rebuild and reclaim kind of power. And I think the final thing I would, my gosh, I think I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yes, no, I had one more, but I've lost it. But yeah, I think that is what I would say. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruby. So thank you for all of your insightful contributions today. I think over the last 90 minutes, we've explored a lot of the complexities and the nuances of PGM in crisis contexts. I hope that moving forward, as we navigate these challenges, let's prioritize, just as Yara said, like taking care of our teams, taking care of ourselves, trying to be adaptable, inclusive, and having meaningful participation amongst community members. So I think altogether we can redefine grant making to not only just respond to the immediate needs, but also to foster resilience and empowerment within our community. So please join me in sharing gratitude and appreciation to Yara, to Ruby, to Nino for their incredible leadership, their candor, their generosity in this dialogue, and their engagement with us for the last 90 minutes. Before we go, I'm going to hand the mic over to Gloria, the PGM community, Participatory Grantmakers Community Practice, to close us out.
Thank you so much, Coco. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This was such a lovely, lovely conversation. If time wasn't finite, we would have stayed here longer. But I hope that we can continue this conversation. Maybe just a little bit of logistical notes. We'll be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel, and we'll also be communicating on any follow-up events in case there are any. I think this is such a timely conversation that we would definitely want to explore in terms of how to continue the conversation. We'll also be sharing our newsletter as an overview of what has been happening within the community. So watch out for that. And if you're not on our listserv, please, please, please also subscribe. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Thanks, everybody. I really enjoyed this. Let's do this again sometime. Thank you, Coco.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you
Bye
so
bye.
much.
so much. Bye. Go well.
Take care. Bye.